slides again. I'll just blow this one up a little bit so you can see a little bit better. Membership in the fund is about the same as it was last time, an increase of 2 members since 2023. You see the breakdown between actives and retirees and so forth. Here's some numbers behind the funded ratio. So actuarial value of assets, $38.4 million. Again, this is on a smooth basis as of July 125, against an accrued liability of $44.5 million. So unfunded liability of the plan is 6.1. You can see that's down quite noticeably from last time, again, largely because of the additional cash contribution, which served to increase the funded ratio up to 86.3%. And then there's the ADEC. And again, we're doing these biennially. So we develop the ADEC for both fiscal 27 and 28 as part of this valuation.
Okay, thanks, Steve. Questions on the police pension valuation from the board members? Okay, why don't we move on to the fire, Steve?
Volunteer fire, similar format to what I just talked about on the police pension. Funded ratio is up since last time. It's 102.8% versus 98.3%, so that's favorable. And the ADEC is down a bit from 40,000 for fiscal 26 to 31,000 for fiscal 27. Did not see the type of cash contribution that we saw in the police plan, so that was not really a big driver here. The asset result was similar, even though the returns are slightly different. Market returns were 10.4% per year on average on a market value versus 5% on a smooth. And by the way, I should have pointed out that the snapshot dates are different in 2025. So the snapshot date on the volunteer fire side is January 1st, while on the police pension, it's July 1st, 25. On the liability side, things were favorable, however, and we've seen this the last few valuations. Not sure how familiar you are with how the volunteer plan works, but it's a points-based benefit accrual. So depending on how many drills the volunteer firefighter attends and how many fires they, calls they make and so forth, they accrue points every year, and they need to accrue a certain amount of points in order to earn a year of service. Well, not as many members earn those points during this cycle as expected, so that meant the accruals were lower, and therefore the liability came in a little bit lower than expected. The town's actual contribution to the fund did exceed the ADEX in total over the past 2 years, but not anywhere near the sort of difference we saw on the police side. So that was really not a big driver. Similar to the police pension, we did pick up the new mortality table. These liabilities are much smaller, as you know, for this fund. So the impact on the ADEC was smaller, about $2,400.
Okay, questions from Steve to Steve on the volunteer fire pension valuation from board members? Okay, if not, then we'll move on to the OPEB. And
yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'll turn this over to my colleague, Stefan Shakurta.
Well, thank you, Steve, and thank you for having me here. I will try not to be too repetitive on some of the topics that Steve had already covered. I'll just kind of point out the things that are a little bit different on the OPEB side versus the pension side. And I do feel like we're kind of going backwards in time, as the pension plan for the police was 7/1/25, the fire was 1/1/25. We're going to go back another 6 months to July 1st, 2024. Like the pension plan, these plans are done every other year, and these we happen to measure them on even years. So we did 24, we'll be doing 26 later on. The first point I'd make out is that the funded ratio dropped from 162.4% in 22 down to 149.8%, so just under 150%. We'll kind of hit on some of the reasons why that happened, and that have to do with assumption changes that we've made. But next, I'll talk about the ADEC. The ADEC also went up slightly from 10,000 for the 24-25 fiscal year up to just over 18,000 for the 25-26 fiscal year that we're currently in. As we saw with the other two plans, there were asset losses, and again, that reason happens to be because we are still recognizing those big losses from the 21-22 fiscal year. So here we're a little further back in recognizing them. So we only earned 4.7% on that smooth actual basis that Steve has talked about already. This is again based on the 6.5 assumption that we had. On a market basis, that average was 6.7%. So the OPEB side didn't do quite as well, and that could be also due to the way they're invested, as they are invested a little differently, that Michael had indicated from the pension side of things. However, on the liability side, there were gains. So that means we did have some favorable experience. A little different than what we see on the pension side because we have different components or different benefits, things that drive the costs on the OPEB side. And one of the primary ones were that the medical premiums came in less than expected. And that's always a good thing, as we, in the last year or so, we probably have been hearing that they're going to go up, and we'll certainly see that, or we'll find that out when we measure the 26 OPEB valuation. But for this case, they did go down. Another thing that we had favorable experience on was on the demographic side. Although we do still have the same retirement, disability, termination assumptions, what we tend to see on the OPEB side is that people tend to drop coverage, and this is where we see some of the gains. When they retire, they may choose not to drop to continue coverage, and they may be covered by the spouse or something. So we tend to see that a little more on the OPEB side. Okay, so we'll go to the next slide. And as I mentioned, this is kind of what Steve had talked about before about how we always look at the assumptions each valuation, and then we talk about any changes we made. Here, first one of the key ones is the discount rate, and you kind of use that interchangeably with the investment rate, but we call it a discount rate. So they're basically the same thing. So again, we look at the target asset allocation, capital market assumptions, and we looked at that. We recommended to the town that the 6.5 may be a little too high, and you certainly might recall that it was maybe a 70-30 on the fixed side. So we recommend that they lower that. Overall, after discussions with Jim and Mike, they decided to lower it down to 6% for this valuation. That increased liabilities to about 6.8%, or about 1.8 million. Again, on mortality, I won't go into the details, but we did update that mortality table. I will mention that Steve did. What he didn't mention was that there are three basic tables when we talk about the public sector. You have what Steve already covered, the safety group, and those rates went up, so that means they're living longer. But there's also two other groups, and those groups are also in the OPEB. Those are the teachers, so those, we'll call them certified, whether it's teachers or administrators. They have their own set of tables. And then you kind of have another bucket that is what we'll call the general employees, which kind of covers everybody else, whether it's secretaries, town hall people, custodians, things like that, all that aren't in the service sector. Even public works will be in there. In both of these tables, the improvements were a little, less, so they found out that people weren't living quite as long. So that means there's some savings on that side, which is kind of the opposite that we saw with the police and fire tables. So that we did see a slight increase, but there are majority of the liability is on the police side. So we did still see a slight increase when we made that change, but only 150,000. So it was very modest. Other changes on the demographic side were retirement, disability, and turnover rates. So there are other groups that are covered in these plans that may not be covered in the pension plan, people that are in the CMERS or in the state teachers retirement plan. And both of those plans did experience studies since the last valuation. So we kind of mirror those, because these people are still covered into those plans. We want to mirror those assumptions in the OPEB benefits. So we updated those assumptions. And on top of that, and the final assumption change that we made has to do with the healthcare cost trend rates. And that's how much we expect premiums to go up year over year. Previously, we would start the initial trend assumption to be 6.5%, but for this 24 valuation, we started at 7%. So for 24, we assume premium is going to go up 7%, and then we continue to grade it down by about 2.2% each year to get an ultimate rate of 4.4%. So these assumption changes also increase liabilities by about $1 million. So all these assumptions in combination increased the liability by about 12.3%, and that's kind of why we saw the funded ratio dropped from 162% to just under 150% on that prior page. So those are the key things. On the next page is, the executive summary, and And this is what I always call the key page in the valuation report, because it kind of has all the information. Can you blow that up a little, Steve?
Yeah, I'm gonna blow that up a little bit.
Yeah, so this has all the basic information. Again, we have the population. You can see in that first bucket that the overall population went from 667 down to 640. And again, that's most likely due to people dropping coverage. I don't think the workforce has shrunk in the town, but but again, people, like I say, people do drop coverage because they may have better coverage, cheaper coverage from their spouse. We do show payroll, but I will point out for most OPEB plans, they're not pay-related benefits unless maybe you have a life insurance or if active employees do make contributions based on pay, but that's not the case here. Then we'll see the next two buckets, which is, again, the liability and the assets. So here we have liability is about $27.9 million, and you can compare that to the $41.8 million on the actual smooth assets. You can see the next line was that unfunded liability, or in this case, overfunded, or that surplus, however you want to look at it. It went from $14.8 million down to $13.9 million. And there's been a lot of talk that surplus, and and how we look at that. And if you remember in the very first slide that Steve talked about, there's that two components: the normal cost component that makes up the ADEC, that normal cost, as well as the past service cost. And in this case, because we're overfunded, you can almost kind of think of it as a past service credit. So you can utilize some of that surplus or that overfunded liability to help offset your costs, right? And that means your ADEC here is really went from 9,000 to 18,000. But if we didn't have this surplus, say the plan was just 100% funded, your normal cost would be just over 700,000. So you're kind of offsetting that 700,000, really only paying 15,000 or so, with interest adjustment, 18,000 of that. So you're kind of using that surplus for that purpose. Yep. So that's kind of a key reason, why you pre-fund a plan, to help offset future costs. Say he put that $6.5 million on the pension side, you reduced your contribution by 500,000 that current fiscal year. So you kind of saw that. That's kind of the case here. You have really small contributions. The contributions, as I said, could be up to 700,000 on an annual basis. But because we have that surplus, your contribution is very small, kind of minimal. So it's much easier to budget at this point in time.
Yep. So that, I think that's probably a good segue. Mr. Brooks, you'd asked the question about, if I understood correctly, about maybe money. Transferring money out. And so, not being an attorney, but it's my understanding, since this is a dedicated trust fund, right? Just you can't look at it just like a bank account where you can transfer money in and out, or certainly out for purposes other than OPEB. However, what I say to clients is, in terms of the funding of the plan, so you really have three buckets in terms of how that money grows over time. You obviously have investment earnings on the trust over time. You've got, in this case, retiree cost sharing, right? Their retirees are kicking in some money towards their benefits. The third piece is the town contribution. So the town contribution, think about it to what, Stefan said. If the plan was in balance, that town contribution would be north of $700,000. Recognizing some of the surplus over time, you basically take your foot off the accelerator quite a bit, almost down to zero in this case, because you're recognizing some of that surplus. So you're not really taking the money out, but you're putting in quite a bit less than you would otherwise. And every evaluation that we do basically trues up the snapshot. I mean, things have been very favorable in the last few cycles for this plan. You've had very good plan experience with respect to premiums for 3 evaluations in a row. You've had favorable demographic experience. You went to the state partnership plan for the 2022 valuation. And then back in 2020, we did a wholesale assumption review, which also reduced liabilities. In combination, all those factors really led to your surplus position that you're at right now. And recognizing that surplus and amortizing it as an offset means that the town's contribution on a relative basis is quite a bit lower than it would be otherwise. So hopefully that answered your question, Mr. Brooks, in terms of, how the surplus came to be and how can it be used right now. And from an actuarial perspective, that would be my response. I don't know if you have anything to add to that, Jim.
Well, I mean, it sounds like we're utilizing the surplus now because we're basically not funding the fund at all in our budget each year. I mean, you could say it's 14,000 or 18,000. That doesn't. That's not. I mean, that's not in this world we're in. That's not real money. Although Jim would say, "How dare I say that?" But
no, it's all relative.
But so if the question is, and I just want to understand it. This is just me understanding it.
Right.
So we've got 40. Am I right to say we have 41? Well, we'll call it $40 million in assets in this fund.
Right.
So in theory, right, you can't take the profits from the fund and move it somewhere else. So I understand that. That makes sense. And that, I again, I'm also not a lawyer, so I'm going to take your word for it. But is it possible or legal or appropriate? All of these questions are important, to take, like we did with the dental plan, the dental fund, as self-funded fund there. And I would imagine the fund was similar, and take a portion of that to, while we're clearly overfunded in this fund, which is great. And I don't want to jeopardize that. I got to make that clear. But is it possible to take a portion of that fund and then move that into the police fund as well? And again, I don't have an answer, and I think it's a longer discussion, but I'm just asking those questions.
I can't answer your question on the dental fund because I don't know the answer. But just one thing I don't wish this on the fund, of course, or anything. All your experience has been very favorable in recent years, which is fantastic. We know that things happen the other way sometimes, 2022, 2008, 2009. So what I would say is you have a pretty noticeable cushion against those sorts of events were they to occur, right? Which is a good thing. I mean, you're in the top 1% of all plans in Connecticut, for example, in terms of your OPEB fund ratio. So that, I just say every valuation we're doing a true up or a snapshot based on what happened in the last couple of years, right? So you've got quite a bit of margin there if things were to turn the other way, right? So sorry.
And I think also.
Sorry to interrupt, Jim or Michael.
Question. Yes, question. Just kind of a global look at this. In one of the plans, you have a significant overfunding, and another you have a shortage. And I kind of understand the shortage more because you're building it over time. You're going to be fully funded when you need the cash. But on the overfunding, I mean, that's huge. And I'm not sure how you get there, how you get something that large, especially when you're looking at it every year or every couple of years. You're looking at it very closely and determining what the next couple of years are going to be.
Yeah. I mean, that's what I was just, and I didn't really put any numbers behind it, but you had favorable increases in medical premiums for 3 cycles in a row, right? And we've seen other clients where the opposite happens, but you've had 3 of those in a row. I mean, that's generated between the medical premiums and demographic changes like Stefan mentioned. That's about just over $5 million since 2020 in terms of surplus that was generated. The change to the Connecticut Partnership Plan, which was in 2022, which is a plan change, right? So that's not something that gets anticipated in advance. It just, the town made that decision, it happened, and we measured the liability impact. That was about a $4.2 million savings. And then the assumption change, which hadn't been done in a while, but that assumption review back in 2020 was another $3.5 million. So these are chunks, a few million here, a few million there. Favorable experience. Again, it could flip the other way, but in the short term, it's been favorable. Pretty soon you get to $14 million. And so those are the sources of those gains since 2020, which is, an enviable place to be. And right now, the way the town's reaping the benefits is instead of making a $700,000 per year contribution to cover the accruals, because these liabilities are growing with interest and accruals, right? They don't just stand still. Down to about $18,000. So it's unwinding in the short term those gains, the clip of about $700,000 a year until such time that we remeasure it next time around.
Jim, you want to provide some context to this discussion?
Well, it's gone in a couple different directions. When you look at the two funds combined, the town is in an unenviable position. So it seems a little perverse to try to defend what we've done, but nevertheless, I will. So
I wouldn't take the inquiries as criticism, but
I
don't think that's the way they're meant.
No, I'm not really taking them that way, but it's kind of like, when we started with the OPEB, we were one of the first ones to set up an OPEB trust. We recognized that we needed to fund this, and we had some good things happen to us. And, in hindsight, we wouldn't have put as much in. I think we were putting money in at the time. And then we're getting newer valuations and we're saying, well, wait a second, had we known it would be this good, we probably wouldn't have done it. We did put money into the police fund, as we've talked about. I do think one of the things I would be looking at, and I'll mention this to Catherine as well, is to continue to look at the medical self-insurance fund and whether there is a continued need for that at all, because the dental insurance claims are relatively predictable. So it's conceivable that you would just fund that in the operating budget, and if you were short, you would do a transfer from contingency. If you were over, then that money would basically go back to the general fund, or the next HR director may have different ideas about benefits and may decide that, maybe we go to premium based on the dental side. So there is something to look for there. I do agree that, that was. I was going to say when Josh asked the question during the pension report, that yes, the OPEB is a trust, whereas the medical self-insurance fund was not a trust. The medical self-insurance fund was a special revenue fund, so it doesn't have some of the same, protections or requirements that, one being investing for the exclusive benefits of its purpose and for the participants, which is typically true of trust. Now, if you look at the town entity-wide, I mentioned before about, the rating agencies looking at OPEB and our pension liabilities. When you look at them all together, and that would basically net out. So not to zero, of course. So let's call it 14 million in the OPEB would basically wipe out the 6.5 million liability on the police side. So, in hindsight, could we have gotten things in the right buckets? Yeah, potentially. But in terms of the taxpayer and the liabilities, they are what they are. And some of that surplus is benefiting the taxpayer because we're not actually funding the OPEB at $700,000. Now, if you really want to go a step further, you'd say, all right, fine. Let's take the $700,000, which we were going to do for the, the normal cost for OPEB, and stick that in the police fund. And then instead of $1.2 million, which is the ADEC for next year, you'd be looking at $1.9 million. Now, then again, you'd be taxing for it, but I don't think that's where the town wants to go, and that's not where I would recommend that we go. So I think what we're doing, given that the cards we've been dealt, which again are very good cards, I think is appropriate.
All right, Jim. Thank you. Appreciate that. And Any other questions with regards to these actuarial
I think Mike Laporte had his hand up.
Yeah.
Mike, go ahead.
Yeah, I'll be just a real quick comment. I don't think it's really come up, but I think there's another thing to consider here, and that is that we went from, I believe it was 40% in bonds up to 80% or 70% rather in bonds when we overfunded the OPEB, and so it's harder to quantify it except looking backwards, but to the comment that Steve was making, having roughly 2x the allocation to bonds, and these bonds are now matched to the liabilities, that's going to greatly reduce the funding volatility or the ADEC volatility going forward for the pension. So it's, again, it's harder to quantify that, but the theory is that will put a much smaller volatility burden on the taxpayers going forward as well.
Thank you, Michael. Josh, are you okay with those responses?
Yeah. I think for me, it's more informational.
Sure.
I'm not here to. I'm not going to set a policy tonight, or I think it's more informational to understand all of this a little bit. What our options are as a community and as a town. I cannot emphasize enough that, on so many fronts, when I go to these meetings and I hear the experts that know a lot more about this stuff than I do, and they always say, well, the town is in good shape. So my comment only is that it's a comfortable place to be, more than comfortable place to be. So I just want to fully understand what our options are, and now I have a better understanding of it, and so we'll keep moving forward.
All right, thank you. Thank you. Fran, you have a question?
Yeah, just a couple quick thoughts. So this is every couple of years we do the actuarial studies, correct? Is that
Yes.
correct?
Yes.
And it's a point in time study.
Mm-hmm.
2 years from now, and I don't know the historical returns on these funds. And I don't need to see them, but returns 2 to 3%. That 13 million overfunded account, how much could that, do we stress test the actuarial based on a different market condition? Or do we use 6% just as roughly 6% over time, and just forget about the possibility of a 2 to 4 year downturn where rates are lower, market gets hit, and that 13 million now only looks like 3 million?
Well, right. I mean, so I think short answer to your question is we don't stress test it. We are using the expected return, but every 2 years is a true up to what actually happened over the 2 years. The way that, you sort of dampen that impact in the short term is through the asset smoothing that I mentioned before.
Okay.
Basically, every year we look at what was the expected return of the fund. Let's just use the 6% on the OPEB side, and let's just say that the plan earned 1%, which is 5 percentage points less than that. What we do the following year is say, okay, we had a loss of 5 percentage points. We're going to recognize that loss over 5 years. So we're going to recognize 1% this year, another 1% next year, and so forth until it's fully phased in. We do the same thing when there's a gain. If the market earned 11, which is plus 5, we'd pick up the extra 1 the first year and so forth. So that's called asset smoothing. Mm-hmm. And there's sort of an ebb and flow to that. They roll off, roll on, and that dampens the impact in the short term on the funded ratio and the town's budget. And so, although I don't think that's like directly what you're asking in terms of stress testing, it sort of gets at the same point where we recognize that the market can and has made some big moves both ways, and we don't want things to swing around too much in the short term because of that.
I guess my only to the first selectman Josh's comment, that 13 million 2 years from now, based on the smoothing and everything, could that really be 7 million in 2 years based on the smoothing effect in a downturn market?
I mean, I don't want to say never say never, right? Because as soon as I say it, but I think that would be like probably 4 or 5 standard deviations to the bad in combination when you looked at like liability and assets together.
Yeah.
It would take everything having to go wrong at the same time.
Gotcha. I totally understand that. I was just wondering how fast that 13 million could change. And you guys do the smoothing effect and all that.
Yep.
But I understand. Thank you.
Jim, you have a comment?
Yeah, I was going to say when I heard that question, I knew where that was coming from, a 300 basis point up or down, right, Fran? But that's what credit unions use. But
Yeah.
I mean, the closest thing we might have to that is in our audit report. There's in the notes to the financial statements, they talk about, the impact of changes to pension liabilities based on changes in the discount rate.
Correct.
That's about the closest as you would come to that type of sensitivity analysis, but that's also using market value as opposed to the actuarial value, which reflects the smoothing that Steve's talked about. So what I could do is I could show you like a page in the audit, not quite what you're asking for, but it does show how changes in discount rates, so you might change a discount rate if your returns were bad, right? So changes in discount rates, how they impact the liability. So that's half of what you're looking at. So
Perfect. That's fine. Thank you. I appreciate it.
Okay.
Before we move on, Chairman Mooney, I just want to thank Steve. I've always been a fan of your work from afar, so I just wanted to thank him. I just wanted to thank you for everything.
Thank you, Josh. Appreciate that.
Yeah. Again, I think on behalf of the board, Steve, thanks for your many years of service, and I appreciate it. Good luck in your retirement. And Stefan, welcome aboard. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Okay. All right. So we're going to move on to item number 8, which is to consider and, if appropriate, approve the following request and resolution from the Board of Education to increase the following revenue and expenditures of the adult education budget due to the addition of elementary children enrichment programs. And essentially, the increase is $42,490, and so that that will fund various accounts, salaries for $1,500, employee benefits for $390, purchase services for $34,600, office supplies for $500, instructional supplies for $2,500. Miscellaneous for $500, and bank services for $2,500. And so the resolution for consideration here is resolved that the Board of Finance recommends to the RTM an increase in the appropriation for the fiscal year 2026 Shoreline Adult Education Fund budget from $72,500 to $114,900. This increase will be funded through additional tuition revenue and will support the implementation of the elementary children's enrichment program. And I believe we have Blaze on the line here. Welcome, Blaze.
Hello, everybody.
You'd like to handle this request for the Board of Ed?
Yep, I will start, and we also have, I believe, Christine Bjork, who's going to take over. Christine Bjork is the Director of Shoreline Adult Education and runs the program. First, just wanted to welcome the 2 new board members on the Board of Finance. Nice to see you. Looking forward to working with the both of you. I'm Blaze Levitan, Chief Operating Officer for the Board of Education, and always glad to see our partners over here at Town Finance. And so, yeah, Christine will go through the specifics and can introduce herself too. One of the things that, as a high level, I think to think about is, some funding from the federal government for adult education is less stable maybe than it has historically been. And so that has prompted us to consider some ways that we can be creative with our existing infrastructure to meet other needs that the district potentially has, or that the community has. One of those would be to use sort of our instructor network to expand some after-school programming at a way that could be a no net cost to the operating budget. It could be funded by tuition. Many other districts sort of use, instead of adult education, they kind of have a continuing education model. So Christine Bjork and her team, they've done a great job kind of looking at ways that we can do some after-school enrichment. Also in the 27 budget, we'll be looking to bring in-house a para-pro program as well. These are ways to diversify the overall program and make it a little more sustainable, as well as to kind of put a boost on the enrichment side, which is the more flexible side. So I want to hand it over to Christine Bjork to take it from here. And Christine, let me know what else you need.
Thank you. Thank you, Blaise. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, everyone, for having us. Tonight, yes, I'm really excited to share that Shoreline Adult Education is looking to expand our enrichment program beyond working just with adults and to pilot an elementary enrichment program at all 3 elementary schools starting in March. And to build this budget, we're operating under the following assumptions. We anticipate being able to have 20 to 25 classes per 2 sessions, each 20 to 25 in each session, with a minimum of 8 to 10 students in each class. We anticipate the average cost for a class to be $120, taught by certified teachers, but we will have a sliding scale. So these classes will be accessible to all children in Branford Public Schools. As far as the increases in expenses, the salary non-certified line would go towards our current adult enrichment coordinator. She'll be handling the elementary website, elementary enrichment website, so the classes, the registration, and whatnot. Purchase services and professional technical expenses would include the stipend for the elementary enrichment coordinator, a site supervisor at each school during classes, the stipends for the teachers, and also the cost to build out the elementary enrichment site on our website. The non-instructional supplies would be for snacks for anyone who doesn't have a snack. Instructional supplies would differ by class. So we have a wide variety of classes that we plan to offer. We have some different art classes. We have like directed drawing and crochet and a craft lab. And then we also have academic oriented classes. So there's math enrichment, problem solving, cooperative games, and activities. We have a graphic novel writing class, chemistry fun. We also have some movement oriented classes, so a yoga and a sports class. And then we have a Spanish language class, and then an elementary engineering class. So for mini makers, design it and try it. So the instructional supplies will differ across the different classes. I built it in miscellaneous for any unanticipated expenses, and then the bank services fees that we have for registration and students signing up. So that is our budget. We're super excited to move into this new venture.
And Chairman Mooney,
Sure.
I just wanted to add to that what we've done, and Christine's really done a great, I think, job with coordinating. She's done some surveys of existing instructors, and this is also intended. You'll notice in the type of programming she talked about, we did a good job, I think, of looking at parks and recreation offerings. We work really closely with Parks and Rec across the board. We're not competing in any way with Parks and Recreation on this. This is supplementing sort of a different type of after-school activity. And so it's building upon other frameworks that we have. We're separately working where it makes sense with parks to expand, to also do some of that too. Nally's team has been really good working with our health director and some of our principals directly on where it makes sense for that too. So this is specifically been intention to kind of bring all these different resources the town has together without competing or sort of overlapping.
All right. Well, thank you both. It sounds very exciting. Questions on this transfer from board members?
Mr. Chairman, I would like to note for the record that the resolution amount should be changed to 114,990, not 900.
Okay. Duly noted for that typo. Thank you. Thank you. Someone want to move that resolution that I read, or do you prefer me to read it again? Al?
To accept. Move to accept.
Move to, okay, Al has moved. Alfred has moved it.
I'll second it.
Seconded by Yvette. Is there discussion? All in favor?
Just one comment.
Sure, Al.
That emblem on your shirt, is that did you wear the right shirt tonight to the meeting? Does that say in Ellington?
Yeah, I got the wrong shirt on. It says Ellington Fire Department on it.
Anyway.
All right. So we'll still consider a request, Blaze. Okay. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. Okay. Thank you, and good luck, Christine.
Thank you.
All righty. Next, number 9 is to consider and, if appropriate, approve a transfer request for fiscal 25. Fiscal 25? 25, 26, I assume, for the fire department. From communications, 15,000, from CMed, 1,800, volunteer officer stipend, 4,500, longevity, 1,000, for a total of 22,300, and moving into purchase services, 16,000, and other supplies, 6,300, for a total of 22,300. Chief Thomas Mahoney, how are you?
Good, Joe. How are you?
I'm good. Thank you, sir.
Good. And this is my first meeting with the new board members, so hello to all of you and welcome. So we are asking for these transfers. Our repairs and maintenance and other purchase services are both expended, barely halfway into the year. Now, I will note that we have approximately 28,000 in repairs and maintenance tied up in blankets and another 5,000 in other supplies. So those are with our various vendors we use for repairs and parts and whatnot to keep things running. But the pressures on these accounts are primarily due to repairs and maintenance on apparatus, as you know, and we've had in many past meetings about the age of the fleet. The youngest in the group is our frontline piece, is 11 years old already, and that will, while we have 4 new pieces of apparatus in order, the earliest isn't due until next month. So we've had quite a bit of very expensive repairs to keep these on the road, and that's what's put us in this predicament. And then other supplies is just a combination of the consistent increase in supplies. It hasn't really slowed down any that I can see. And of course, we're sharing our building with the police department, so we're using not quite double, but a significant amount. So that's where the shortages come from in these 2 accounts. And we've tried to budget them conservatively, certainly in light of the increases we've had in personnel. And the accounts that we're taking them from, communications, we've been able to reduce significantly the amount of communication devices we need this year through, we're pretty much had modems in all of our apparatus. We don't need the modems anymore, so each one of those was a charge, as well as our cellular telephone use is way down. CMed was just the balance after their invoice this year. Volunteer officer stipends, that is actually coming out of the main stipend account. So, we're just going to ask that you move the money from one line, that line, into these lines, and then we should be fine in the overall stipend lines at the end of the year. And lastly, longevity is just due to retirements.
Okay. Thanks, Chief. Questions on this transfer from the board members? Okay, somebody want to move it?
I'll move it, Joe.
Moved by Deborah, seconded by Fran. Is there discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Okay, thank you, Chief, and take care.
Thanks, Board. Appreciate it.
Okay. Item number 10 is to consider and if appropriate, approve a transfer request from the general government buildings for $4,000 from fuel oil and moving that into uniforms and clothing for a total of $4,000. Brian, you're on the Zoom here. Welcome. I think you're on mute.
You hear me now?
Yes, sir.
Yes. The 4,000 for into the uniform and clothing is for the uniforms for my custodians, which is provided by Cintas. When I did my budget last year, I was not told about an increase in by Cintas, so that's why I'm projected to be short. So I'm transferring 4,000 from my fuel oil, which we should be fine with, to the uniform and clothing account.
Okay. Questions from Brian on this request?
If I may.
Sure, Josh.
It's not really on this request, but before we move on, I would just like to make the board aware, due to some, various unforeseen expenses, there is a possibility that we will have to come back to the board for monies for purchase services down the road, as it's only January and a good percentage of that account has been used. So just keep that in mind moving forward, so it's not a surprise when we get there.
Okay, thanks, Josh. Questions? A motion's been made and seconded, correct? Or did I miss that?
Joe, I'd just like to point out on the agenda that, or not on the agenda, on Brian's letter, it's for 25, but it actually should be for 26 fiscal year.
Okay. Same thing. Okay. That's
Yeah,
fine.
same thing as with,
Right. It says 25, 26 on his letter, so that's good.
oh, okay, just the agenda.
Okay.
Okay.
Yep. Okay. Very good. Where are we? I guess all in favor?
You need a motion.
Do we have a motion? I move that we approve the transfer.
Okay. Second.
Okay, motion's been made and seconded. Discussion. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. All right, thank you. All right, item number 11 is to discussion regarding future policy considerations for fund balance, reserves, and debt service. I know we're approaching the 9:30 hour, so but I did want to kind of continue the conversation that we started over a year ago with regards to the possible need for a fund balance and debt service policy. And historically, I'm not, I go by the view, if it's not broken, don't fix it. But I think that, in light of the town's very fortunate position of having a very healthy fund balance and other reserves, and there's continually through the elected process, new people coming on and serving. We have a new administration. We have new RTM members. We have new Board of Finance members. We have a new finance director and a retiring finance director. And we have, different players. As you see, the actuaries are, Steve is retiring. So it's healthy to go over as to, how we got here and whether or not we should make adjustments along the way. And so, as we all know, the Board of Finance is an appointed board. We're appointed by the Board of Selectmen, who are elected. We have a role that's set up in charter, and we have roles and responsibilities that are not only in the charter but state statute. And so, but Branford is unique in many ways. One is that we are an appointed board; we're not elected. Many boards of finances around the state are elected, and they have a different calling to some extent. We are a board that many times is impartial, non-political. But we have to also make sure that we're in tune with the times and such. Jim did provide us with a draft policy for fund balance as well as for debt service, which we've distributed, and we can contemplate that down the road. And what I thought tonight is to kind of bring it out in the open and understand that Jim also provided us with some. And to me, which I forwarded on to you folks, some studies by the GFOA, the Governmental Finance Association of America, that Jim has participated in. I did years ago. A very good group, at times scholarly, and looks at not only state to state but also across the nation. So many times there's a lot of as we know, there's each municipality and or county or state deals with different things, not only different financial and tax regimens, also what their liabilities and risks are. But what's interesting about the GFOA documents is it says, is it time to rethink reserves and, not just look at it as a fund balance, and for us, not just to look at it as a number that we plug the budget with to make the tax number change, because as we know, the primary driver of the tax rate in Branford is not only the expenditures but the taxes, the actual tax levy that we end up imposing due to the relatively, I guess, small revenues compared to, let's say, other larger cities in the state. In context, I think to look at, again, this is Jim's last meeting, so I don't want to belabor it. But we, over Jim's tutelage, he's picked up the ball back 27 years ago, and since probably the early 70s, the Branford has, really strived to improve its credit rating and has been very active in the bond market, either short-term notes, investments, long-term bonds and such, to fund all sorts of capital and expenditures. And during that period of time was primarily for sewers and obviously schools and roads and such. When Jim came in, he just enhanced on the development of, the financial strategy that, we've been an outlier in many instances, not only, let's say, the OPEB trust or the coastal resiliency, self-insurance, we've pursued on that to very, very good end for the town. Our pension investment policies that we've adopted, the sinking funds that we have across the board, which then again put over time, they smooth out the burden to the taxpayers. Performance-based contracts for energy, to name a few, coastal resiliency funds. So we've identified, and this kind of ties back to what the GFOA says, is that in their documents, that it's really a risk-based analysis as to what your reserves do and what purpose they are. So in light of that, we know that there's pressure to say, why wouldn't we return some of this money back to the taxpayer? Why don't we reduce the taxes? And I think the board has plugged in, I use that word, has used fund balance as a balancing item in the budgets forever, and increased it or decreased it over time based on really what some of the pressures were or what the risks were for funding. So I think it's not a complex topic, but I think there's many components of it. And the fund balance does tie, and the use of reserves ties closely to the debt service policy because, again, we look at that as to how we can fund some of the needs, and we're again fortunate whether or not we buy a fire truck for cash, or in the old days we'd bond it for a period of time. But we know we have a large amount of capital items that are going to come before us, not only for the schools, possibly the treatment plant, and other types of capital expenditures that come forward. So we need to be cognizant of that whenever we look at fund balance and what it means. Now, recently, the S&P had the review back in October pointed out that, yes, they maintained and reaffirmed our AAA rating. They also it kind of expected in their report that we would maintain at least a 35% percentage for fund balance or reserves as a percentage of operating revenues. And yes, we are higher than that, and we're fortunate. And we need to say, okay, well, what happens over the next 3 to 5 years, and what might we do to mitigate any large increases that may come in fund balance based on things that may not be expected during the budgetary process. So, again, I just offer that as an opener. Again, tonight we're kind of running a little bit longer than I expected, but I'd like to hear some comments from the board members and maybe Josh and Jim and Catherine, at least to maybe what some of your views might be on a brief basis. So maybe Yvette, I'll start with you.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's prudent to try to maintain the balance as much as possible. I think it would be penny wise and pound foolish to try to do a very small lowering of taxes and then have to hit people up for a big increase down the road. As I said when the topic came up with the contingency fund last year, we have, the snowstorm, we have the hurricanes that come in. We've got so many different issues that can hit us hard at one moment or another. And I think it would be really prudent to try to have as much ready to be able to deal with them. I don't mean too much, but enough. And I think that that's where we are in order to keep our bond rating as good as possible so that we're paying the lowest possible interest. And that we're prepared to be able to handle those emergencies. I believe that it's a good way for a household to live, and I think it's a really good way for a town to live. Thanks.
Thanks, Yvette. I'll go to Harry and then Deborah after that. Harry?
Am I on?
Yes, you're on.
Okay. Well, I guess to say, Joe, you and I are, we won't use age, but the two senior guys who you with a lot of years, me with a few years of discussing this, and it's not something that just came up. And I think what Yvette said is it. I think going forward, we need to set a floor, a balance, and look at the differences of what our capital needs are, improvements, and what we say the heavy duty equipment like fire department, public works, et cetera, et cetera. So I think as our new constituted board of the six of us, we've got to work together to figure that out and see how we either work a dollar or a percentage, but nothing more each year, to keep a healthy balance. Because even, part of that shows how well the town is run. It assists us in keeping an excellent bond rating. And I think that's important because we do go to the market to buy and sell. And I think we want to be able to continue that because the good work of the previous boards of finance, which are always 3 Republicans, 3 Democrats, come together and have constituted good budgets and proper management. So our job going forward is to continue that. That's it.
Thanks, Harry. Deborah?
Thanks. I have to say, I certainly agree with the comments that Evie and Harry have made. And I think that Branford is certainly in a very enviable position compared to a lot of towns, including some of our immediate neighbors. And I think that's due in no small effort from our finance department and just the way that our funds have been managed. I think that it's absolutely prudent that we keep an adequate fund balance, to help us with some of the capital projects. Joe, as you said, some of the capital projects that we have coming up, as well as to defend us against a catastrophic loss, which, especially being a shoreline town, is not outside the realm of possibility. We have our Coastal Resiliency Fund, which would help us in that eventuality, but to have a good, strong fund balance is really in everybody's best interest. And to keep in mind that to have, some kind of structure around what we have, I think is really important so that we can really maintain that, that thought of sustainability. In terms of what that kind of funding is used for, again, in terms of sustainability, and that aspect of budgetary smoothing. Those are all things I think that we need to keep in mind. But again, the comments that were thrown out about the percentages, that 35%. I think that's more than reasonable in terms of what the rating agencies are looking for. And that the amount of money as a percent of the overall budget that again would sustain the town in the event of that type of emergency or the need for big capital projects.
Thanks, Deborah. I know that in the GFOA they did talk about the parametric insurance types of things for those types of catastrophic events. That again, that's what they look at as far as the strategy of not only looking at reserves for various reasons, but also how it's risk management and how it may tie with types of insurances and such. Alfred, and then Fran. You have comments, Alfred?
Yeah, great. Thank you, Joe. As a new member, I never thought much about fund balance and how it relates to annual expenditures. And when the subject came up, I thought, geez, I better educate myself a little bit. So what I did is I went to the states. The state of Connecticut has a kind of a register which they publish annually, and it's all financial statistics from just every state, city, town in the state, and it talks about all sorts of things. Talks about fund balance, talks about how much education costs. It's just everything that you could come across in connection with a municipality, how it spends its monies, how much it raises, etc. So I went on that, and I've heard some comments from, I guess, past board meetings that issues about our risks are higher because we live on the shoreline. We don't want to lose our AAA bonding. So I went on specifically to try to hone in on some of those issues. And I'm not saying this is it. This is what we want to do. I just think that if we're starting a conversation among all of us to come up with a target, which is the right number, I think you have to understand what other towns are doing. The first thing I took a look at is the per capita income of Branford. And then I went to get a list of all the municipalities in the state that has a per capita income the same or greater than Branford, thinking that, hey, these are probably more affluent towns, so be interesting to see their approach to their fund balance. So when I did that study, I studied 34 towns that fell in that category. And basically, what it came up with was the average fund balance relationship between fund balance and annual expenditures was 17%. Ours is 39%. This average of similar towns, similar economic status, is 17. I said, "Oh, that's a little weird." So then I went on and we've all we live on the shoreline. We all have this risk of strong storms that come along, not every year, but every once in a while, and certainly are scary and they're expensive. So I took all the shoreline towns, starting in New York, going up to Rhode Island, pulled those out, did a study on those, compared those, and they came up with an average fund balance relationship of 17%. Average, which was I thought they might have greater fund balances because of their greater risks of that. It came up to 17%. So then I said, okay, how about the bond ratings? Maybe the bond ratings, the ones that have the AAA bond ratings, have greater fund balance relationships. So I went and studied those. There were only 17 towns that had AAA published in this report. Of those 17 towns, again, their average fund balance was 17%, and ours is 39. So I'm not making a conclusion on that, but I think that is an extremely important issue to chat about as we deal with this issue, is what is the proper value. There's a base of basically every town in the state has a relationship of the fund balance to expenditures of 17 to 20%. It's in that range. We're 39. And we happen to be, we're a mature town. We have a long history of financial dealings. We have great management, very strong management. And here we are as an outlier in terms of that one statistic. So I'm not saying that's right. I'm not saying that's where we should be, but I think we cannot ignore that. So in our discussion of what our risks are and what we should be covering through a fund balance, we've got to pay attention to what the people around us are doing. So that's what it is. I just want to participate in that discussion and make sure we don't lose sight of we are an outlier from the average of the state of Connecticut.
All right. Thank you, Alfred. Appreciate that. Fran?
Well, I, again, being new to this board, just learning a lot about it, but all the comments made by yourself, Mr. Chairman, and all the committee members, I certainly understand from the outside looking in now that there are things we could probably look at to fine tune our fund balance. Rather than discuss some of the fine thoughts that were already brought up, I would probably just want to wait until we really sit down and have discussions on it, where I'll probably have more questions and I've done some more research myself. So, but okay. I like all the thoughts, and everyone made very valid points. And I agree with all of them. So,
thank you, Fran. I'd like to have Josh, Catherine, and Jim, maybe in that order. Josh, if you like to make some comments.
Sure. The one thing I would caution is, this is such a hard. It's not an easy answer. There's no easy answer here. It's very complicated. But it's a great problem to have, right? I'm a very fiscally conservative individual. As Catherine will tell you, I look at every bill and it doesn't matter how much it is, it hurts. But I would caution this body or anybody in the town to set hard and fast rules, right? So if we say, all right, we're going to set a policy of, I'll say 35% and a floor of 20%. So, something like that. I'll use those percentages as a thing. What it does is I feel like it hamstrings us in how we move forward. So, for example, the wastewater treatment plant in September gets blown away, and we have to spend, I wouldn't even begin to know how much, but $100 million, and we don't have a choice. We have to have our sewers. We got to spend $100 million. If we set a floor, it limits us in how much of that fund balance we would, be able to spend, or we could spend it, but then we would need to tax it if we had a policy. So from that aspect, I would caution a policy, but perhaps more of guidelines if it feels like a little bit less restrictive. The other thing that I've noticed and I struggle with when I'm preparing for this budget and in my discussions with Jim and Catherine, $6.5 million of the fund balance went towards smoothing out taxes on the reval last year. So in order to try to keep taxes where they are, right? If that was my goal, I need to add $6.5 million from the fund balance. And if we're going to do that year in and year out, it gets harder. The fund balance can't grow, right? And I'm not saying it needs to grow now, but it needs to be thought of is as our budget grows, and it's going to grow. We all know it. The amount changes in the percentage. So I did some math, and if $50 million is 39% this year, next year it's 37. Like my math could have been off because I don't know. Anyway, 37, and then the subsequent next year it's somewhere in the neighborhood of 34.5. So if you hold it at 50 million in a few years, it starts to fall in that percentage way, and then you're not taxing to keep up a percentage of the fund balance. So I would caution in how we use fund balance. Yes, I don't think anybody disagrees that there is an opportunity because we have, more savings than is expected of any town, and percentage-wise, we have an opportunity. But how we spend it matters, and I think that needs to be our focus moving forward, more so than the percentage, that we spend it in a way that we don't, from one year to another, if we were going to stop spending it, it jumps drastically on the taxpayers. And I think, to me, that's the most important issue, how we spend it and using it for the right opportunities. So that's my 2 cents.
Thank you, Josh. Much appreciate that. Catherine, you have a few comments as the new finance director?
I do, and I'm going to apologize if I start coughing in the middle of it. I think that as you're looking at percentages and you're trying to develop a policy, I think it might be prudent to bring in Mark Chapman, our financial advisor from Munistat Services. He was with Jim, myself, and the former first selectman when we were on the call with the rating agencies, getting our bond rating reaffirmed. So, I think he could provide a lot of valuable guidance. I think that, part of the conversation with the rating agency was, they had asked us what our plan was going forward with fund balance, and how we use fund balance, and, somehow how we during the budget process, it is not just about, lowering that tax rate, but it is also looking at maybe pulling out one-time capital needs and funding those needs out of fund balance to, smooth out the increase from year to year. I think that Branford has a very strong financial, we've been strong in our financial processes for years, and I think that it would be very wise to ask what our financial advisor thinks that range should be. I don't know what that range should be either, whether it's 20 to 25%, 25 to 30, but I do know that the rating agencies are looking at those numbers across the state, not even just the state, but the country. And I think, and I apologize, I'm really feeling under the weather, but that was my 2 cents. And I agree with Josh, use it wisely, so that there is not an increase that jumps from year to year for the taxpayers, is a wise decision. I'm sorry, that's it. Did I cut out?
Joe's trying to talk. Joe, are you muted?
Oh, I'm sorry.
Is Joe muted?
No, he's not. But Joe, we've lost your sound. Still can't hear you. Oh, there you go.
Zoom, we're getting zoomed out here.
Yeah.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Yeah. Okay.
I lost connection too there for a minute.
Okay. Yeah, I know you were in and out, Catherine. So, Jim, some final remarks, and then we're going to wrap up. But again, what I do want to appreciate is Jim has done a lot of work on this. He's been a really key over the years on the strategy. And again, we've usually set up different transfers, in advance of the budget process in order to try to mitigate, impact of just the tax rate, which again, many times came out of fund balance. So, I think we're very cognizant of it, but obviously, we're moving forward and make adjustments as we need to. Jim?
Yeah, thank you, Joe. I think, I think everyone who has spoken before me has made some excellent points. So that's one of the challenges, I guess, with going last is you have to kind of try to add something in the conversation and synthesize some of what's already been said. So I would say that, the more I've thought about this over the years, the more vexing the problem is. Let me first say that you probably want to set a range so that you're not necessarily hitting a specific target, depending on where you set the range and what's between the high point and the low point is going to give you some flexibility. I do think it's mindful to take into account some of the changing philosophy on fund balance. I don't know if other communities are looking at it that way. I do think that there's value in Al's analysis, looking at the OPM fiscal indicators and seeing where other people are. And then, so that's part of the question. Do you look more locally or do you look broader? So, for example, nationally, we know that the numbers are higher. The Government Finance Officers Association, from what I recall, at a minimum, would talk about having 2 months in reserve, and 2 months in reserve is strikingly close to that 17% that Al, you had found was the mode in terms of looking, or average rather, just looking at all the different communities. I think you have to kind of factor in all the various stakeholders. Obviously, the citizens, the bondholders, and the community. I think if you were to put a private sector hat on, you might look and say, well, how are we allocating capital for the benefit of the citizens? I think that's a broader way of looking at it. And when you're looking at individual towns for comparison, One of the things to take into account is if you're looking at a shoreline town that, they may not have treatment plants. So, for example, Clinton, I don't think Clinton has a treatment plant. I don't think Old Saybrook does. I know Guilford doesn't. I know Madison doesn't. Catherine mentioned about Mark Chapman with IBIC, our financial advisor, because, fund balance is one of the factors the rating agencies look at. But it would seem logical to me that a community with a lower fund balance could offset that with high wealth levels. So that's kind of how you look at it. And in the end, I don't think there's a perfect formula, because I've asked that question at conferences. I've asked questions of panelists or a series of panelists saying, well, what is the right formula for reserves? I said, you have the rating agencies that want to see a certain amount of reserves. Your taxpayers want to see you put some reserves to basically offset part of the taxes. Branford's putting dollars in a coastal resiliency fund. Branford buys insurance. Well, are we effectively underinsured? Is there an argument that maybe we need to have a more detailed analysis of our insurance needs? And then the question is, we, add to, keep a portion of reserves for that, or do we transfer the risk to insurance? So there's a whole series of things to take into account, and there may not be a right answer. It may be what you're comfortable with, what you could defend publicly, and what you could define that's in the public interest. And so I think, also, I think for the new members, you're going to go through the budget process. That may influence your thinking on fund balance. I don't want to make any predictions whether it will or not, but I think that's obviously a factor. And, the Board of Ed, as we know, is I think their capital plan that was mentioned the other night at their meeting, so I think it's $250 million. That's right, $1 billion. We're working with our state reps to try to, improve some of our reimbursement rates. That's a strategy. It's not guaranteed. So those are some things to think about in terms of what you're going to be in the market in future years. And, the fund balance and cash is going to help you in terms of timing those bond issues. And so that's important. So I guess in summary, I'll just say there are a lot of factors to consider. The more, the better, but at some point, you're probably going to have to come down on a range of numbers that you could defend, and one that's sustainable and what works for Branford. You want to, understand what's going on in the rest of the world, and certainly what's going on in the nation is a little bit scary in terms of what the risks to communities are. You have a treatment plant that's on the water. BRIC funding is going away. So those are some other things to think about. So, but I think, I think it's a good start. I think, we drafted something. The rating agencies have asked us if we have adopted policies, and we say, we show them our budget letter, but we also tell them that we're working on draft policies. So I think, Joe, you hit it right on the head. You have changes, turnover, transitions, and I think that's where kind of the rating agencies have asked for these policies, because for the last almost 28 years, they've heard from the same people. So. All
right, Jim. Much appreciated. Okay, I think that'll be the wrap on item number 11. Item number 12, I think, was a placeholder. Josh, you don't have anything that we need to add to the agenda, do you, at this point?
Things. I don't have something we're going to add to the agenda, but as I'm sitting here with my other computer, and I was thinking about this earlier because I had read the email, but it didn't ding into me until now. We did not, I say you, the Board of Finance did not vote on to rebalance the police plan. I don't know if that's something you need to do, but there wasn't a vote. There wasn't a vote to.
I thought we did that, Trista. Did we?
Yes, I have Al as making the motion and Fran seconding it for the rebalance.
Okay, well then I'm sorry. I apologize.
That's okay.
That's how I raise my hand.
It's good to keep an eye on us.
I got to keep you honest, Joe. I know that.
That's
I just wanted to say, I started working for the town 27 years ago. And, I was just a kid. I didn't know much about anything, but I was, always kind of there and just hanging around. And I met Jim Finch, and I've known Jim Finch for 27 years. And I'll say, of the people that I have met in my lifetime and had a continuous relationship for that long, there's almost no more of a stand-up guy than Jim Finch. And I just wanted to thank him. It's 10 o'clock at night. Jim Finch doesn't need to be here. He could have sicked Catherine on us, but he's here. And that goes to the character of him. So I just want to, this being your last meeting, Jim, on this level, probably your most important level, thank you very much. Not from just me, but from the 30,000 people that depend on you on a regular basis. So thank you so much for all of that. When I see you tomorrow, I'll give you a noogie or something, but for now, thank you very much, and we appreciate everything you've done.
Hear, hear.
Hear, hear, Josh.
Thank you, Josh.
Congratulations.
I appreciate it. Thank you, Josh. Appreciate it.
Yeah, I tell you, Josh, you said it all. But Jim has been such a valuable part of the town's administration and so important asset to Board of Finance and RTM and all the boards and commissions and departments. It's just Catherine's going to do a great job, and Jim will be missed. So, but Jim, it's been a pleasure. I've always enjoyed our relationship, and I know the board members have really really appreciate what you've done for us. So to wrap up tonight, what now? What?
Well, you opened it up, Joe.
Okay.
Yeah, no. That's going to be very brief. I just want to say thank you to the Board of Finance. I've enjoyed it immensely. Working with you, and a lot of the things that makes Branford special wouldn't happen if it wasn't for the Board of Finance. And Joe, you've been an exceptional chairman to work with. You've been a friend. You've been a good person to bounce ideas off of. And I don't know if a lot of people know this, but there's lots of times when we're discussing budget issues where Joe and I will talk to each other and we'll just say, are we good with each other? Because we're debating things, over the years, and maybe it looks like, it's there's never a disagreement, but Joe, your input's been invaluable. You made me a better finance director. I appreciate that. And I'd be remiss if I didn't mention all the other folks that I've had the pleasure to have worked with on the Board of Finance. Don Jackson was first, and all of them who are no longer with us. Don Jackson, the first chairman, Charlie Shelton, Lorraine Young, Ken Kaminsky, and more recently, Victor Casella. So, I just want the public to know that they're part of this Branford legacy too. And I've enjoyed working with all of them. So thank you.
Thanks. Thank you, Jim, and best of luck, my friend. Okay, so I'd just like to also thank Lisa Arpin for her longstanding role as town clerk and the board, board clerk. And she's moved on to greener pastures. And thank you to Trista for stepping in tonight. Much appreciated. Quite the long meeting tonight. And I guess with that, I will entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Moved. All in favor?
Aye.
All right, folks. Thank you very much, and we'll see you soon.
Thanks.
Good night. Bye-bye.
Take care.
Good night.
Good night.
This program was brought to you in part through the support of the Town of Branford. Watch town meetings and other videos on demand at BranfordTV.org.